All right, here we are. Lovely to be here today. And the subject of our panel is advancing beyond the ADVANCE Act. And we're not exactly going to be legislating from the panel, but we're going to have a true, genuine conversation. And you notice on the panel, we have representation from many different reactor sizes, large, medium, micro, and really appreciate that. The ADVANCE Act was amazingly bipartisan piece of legislation. It passed 88-2 in the Senate, and it kind of encapsulates where nuclear energy is in the spectrum now, whether you're interested in energy abundance, clean, firm power, or carbon. Nuclear energy is a thing that's left that has amazing support. So with that, I want to start off with Sarah to give us kind of a legislative background. How did we get to the ADVANCE Act? How much work does it take? And the goal of this conversation that we're having publicly is what can we do to move it forward? But let's start with the background of the ADVANCE Act and what was left on the table.
Well, thank you, Charles, and good to see all of you. Thank you for having us today. My name is Sarah Burke, and I'm at the Acquia group, but up until the beginning of January, I was the Deputy Staff Director at the Energy and Commerce Committee. I would say the best committee on Capitol Hill. I don't know how many of you are big ENC fans, but there's no place quite like it in DC for legislating. And in particular, the ADVANCE Act is such a good example of that. We started in the spring of 23 with the best way you possibly can with legislating. We're going to sit down, we're going to get around a table with the Palone team, and we decided this was something we thought we could potentially do in that Congress. She had just taken over as chair of the committee, and we did a request for information. You can imagine how many responses from brilliant people like you, and went to work. It was over a year of work of negotiating, and time again, people would say, why don't you just take the Senate bill? Why don't you just take the Senate bill? But the House, we stood our ground and were able to get some reforms that the Senate couldn't get in. And at the end of the day, we got the best product. And we sat down the goals the first day. We want to get more reactors online, and we want to do it quickly. We want to make permitting easier. We want to streamline the process. And if you ask me today if we got everything, no, I think there's a lot left to do. I'm really excited about the conversation with folks here on the panel to see what they think should be done. Things like the mandatory NRC hearing, I think were things that were left on the table. But we got as much as we possibly could. And it was overwhelmingly bipartisan. I give huge kudos to Peter and Thule, the staffers that led the negotiation, and also the Senate committees that were able to help us at the end of the day get it done. There were a lot of fights in the between, the good old House and Senate battles, as there always are, and good bipartisan negotiations. But I would say the biggest wins of the ADVANCE Act in the middle of a very partisan Congress were we were patient. We went time and time again, negotiations would fall apart, and we'd go back to the table, and they'd fall apart, and we'd go back to the table. And I think at the end of the day, when you do negotiations like that, you get the best product. So, like Charles said, it was an extremely bipartisan effort. I think that it was the biggest nuclear regulatory reform that we've had in over 40 years. And I also think that was the start of quite a few more changes. So that was just the beginning, and I'm excited to see what else we talk about today.
Thanks, Sarah. Slight follow-up, but before we go around the horn here, this is a big month coming up, right, with the tax bill in reconciliation. Is there anything you can tie in with the similarity of the executive orders and what's in the tax bill? Give us some color on what has to happen to get this bill through, especially for me.
What has to happen on the larger bill or on the nuclear side of things?
The nuclear, sorry, I'm a little biased, but the nuclear part of the tax bill, both the current state of it, which has carve-outs for nuclear, and what do we think is at stake over the next month.
Absolutely. Well, I would say, I mean, you have the PTC, ITC. How many folks in this room are a fan of those credits? Those obviously are helpful. I think nuclear ended up pretty well in the House product, right? I think it ended up in a better spot than some of the other sectors within energy. So I would say on timeline, I think nuclear largely stays the same. We got to keep the things that y'all want in there. I think you've got a ton of champions. Nuclear right now, it's in a moment. In terms of energy, it's a moment. And, when we sat down in the spring of 23 about what we could potentially do, that Congress, I think many people thought, quite frankly, Pallone and McMorris Rodgers were on opposite sides in terms of the energy spectrum, and Energy and Commerce had not done a ton of bipartisan energy packages in a while. And so I think people doubted the ability to get that done, and I think we identified potentially nuclear and hydro as areas for bipartisanship, and nuclear, it was its moment. And I think with this administration, you're there again. So I think you see that in this bill. I think it's faring pretty well. I would say in terms of timeline, everyone has the July 4th deadline. I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised. It's Congress. If we slip and we do it the week after July 4th, that's what I would put my money on. I think you always go up to the end of a timeline and we crunch to get it all in, and then you end up doing it right after. So, but I think the pressure is only going to build to get it done. I think we do get it done. Now, if we want to talk about government funding in September, I don't know if that's a different story, but I do think that we end up getting the big, beautiful bill done. I think it ends up happening around July 4th or a little after, or maybe that's just the hopeful in me.
That's great. So I will continue with the introductions. Maybe I'll start on the far side, Rita. And what I've asked, of course, talk about your long and illustrious background and introduction to your new company, which we're all curious about, but especially tell the story of your customers, the prospective customers. What do they need out of legislation and, let's say, a future Advance Act or intersections with the current tax bill? If you could take it from
Sure. So I'm Rita Baranwal. I am the Chief Nuclear Officer at Radiant, which is a microreactor company, and I'll talk about Radiant in a moment. I have had 27 years in the nuclear industry, and I actually started out developing nuclear fuel for the U.S. Navy's nuclear aircraft carriers and submarines. And as a materials engineer by degrees, that experience kept me in this industry for this long. I'm really excited, as has already been mentioned, that this is the moment for nuclear energy. And we need every single tool in the toolbox, from microreactors to SMRs to gigawatt-scaled reactors. So Charles, good job on getting us all represented here. But I want to talk a little bit about the importance of nuclear in this country and in the world. There are many different applications for nuclear beyond electricity. There are countries that are looking not only for the electricity, but they're looking for the process heat, for the district heating it can provide, as well as desalination capabilities. And I think one of the most important features that nuclear energy can provide to society, and we don't talk about it enough, is the production of life-saving radioisotopes. So if you or somebody that you love has ever had a medical diagnostic or a medical treatment with radioisotopes, those have been generated by nuclear plants. So we touch many different lives in many different ways. I was on the plane home from LA on Friday, and the woman next to me started talking to me, much to my chagrin, because I'm an introvert. But anyway, but it turned out to be a good thing. So she then finally dug into, what do you do? And I said, I just started a new job. By the way, this is day 6 for me as CNO at Radiant. And then she went on to say, she was like, ooh, that sounds a little bit scary. And I said, no, it's not. And I said, do you know how many reactors are operating in this country, providing clean, affordable, reliable power to its citizens day in, day out? And she said, I don't know, 5? And I said, 94. There are 94 reactors that have been operating in this country, many for decades, and they produce nearly 20% of this country's electricity. And she said, I had no idea. And I said, yeah. And so we talked, and despite me putting my headphones in, she kept talking, which is good. Again, it's all good. But the point is that this industry does what it needs to do quietly, efficiently, affordably, and our neighbors necessarily don't know what we do and why we do. So I think a few of you know, I see some friends of the audience, a few of you know that one of my kind of bully pulpit things is we need to talk more about why we do what we do and how it can impact society for the better. Which brings me to Radiant. Radiant is on a mission to deliver a 1 megawatt microreactor starting in I was born in the 1900s, starting in 2028, and we're going to start testing next year in 2026, and the plan is to start doing that in the NRIC Dome. Some of our customers include the defense applications. They include mining operations. They include remote communities, islanded communities. And we're focusing on the United States at the moment. Radiant is an American company wanting to serve American customers, and we are developing and fortifying the American supply chain. But to that end, we certainly need to start deploying here and build out that base. And then we're looking to eventually go out and export the technology as the company grows. And I'm going to use some notes here because, like I said, it's day 6 for me. So one of the main objectives of Radiant is to be able to provide a replacement to diesel generators. So while these generators may be efficient, the diesel that is needed for that, especially in defense applications, in some cases costs lives. And we want to be able to provide an alternate to that and certainly do that in a way that provides clean energy. We have some national security customers as well that want secure, islanded, reliable power to certainly ensure that their operations are never at risk. And then this 1 megawatt reactor that Radiant has, essentially a reactor in a box, can be delivered anywhere to a site and be established and deployed in less than a week, typically 3 days is what we're looking at. So when you asked about the desired legislative and regulatory changes, the most important changes are going to impact regulation. The current regulatory paradigm in the United States isn't really designed for mass-produced, transportable, modular power generators. That's not to say there's something wrong with it. It's just not designed for that type of product. So there's customers, as I mentioned, that are considering alternatives to diesel generators and grid power, and they're not ready to accept the burden and the timeline that's associated with licensing a gigawatt-scaled reactor. And again, there's nothing wrong with it. Came from a place that did that, but it's a different paradigm that's needed for something that is much, much smaller. And then finally, we need a regulatory regime that is designed to accommodate the technological advances that come with Gen 4 reactors and ensure that commercial customers can reasonably afford to invest in nuclear power. That includes things like high-volume licensing and categorical exclusions for reactors that are less than 5 megawatts in power. So I'll pause there and hand it back to Charles.
Thank you, Rita. Great comments. And a lot of the regulatory changes in Advance Act and the EO focus on that area, that the regulatory bodies are not suited to help the small and advanced reactors. Adrienne, maybe I'll ask you to do your introduction and take Oklo's perspective, share Oklo's perspective.
Sure, I'll jump in first. They're very lucky to have you. Radiant has a great team already, but I'm excited for them to have you on board. My name is Adrienne Schweer. I am with Oklo. We are a small modular reactor company, so we're making a sodium-cooled fast reactor that's about 75 megawatts electric. It's interesting to see this panel. 75, how many are you?
Thousands.
Big.
We got the big one, we got the medium one, and then we got the micro one.
Yeah, you have it all. But we are also an American company founded 13 years ago. We have about 10 years of experience working with the NRC on the application process. I think we are getting really close. Our customers are similarly, we've got some US government customers on the defense side, a lot of data centers and artificial intelligence. Small modular pairs very well with data center build outs because you can build them in concert with the data center itself over and over as opposed to buying kind of one big power source over time. You can build and scale. The coolest thing about Oklo, in my opinion, and what I think you spoke to at the very beginning, is that nuclear fuel, is the biggest challenge that our sector faces. So we could spend all day here talking about the Advance Act 2.0 and regulatory reform and permitting reform, and I have lots of passions around there. But
right
America used to produce more nuclear fuel than the world combined, and today we produce very, very little. And none of us will be successful without an abundance of fuel. And we've seen some really good policies, especially coming out of the executive order, and bipartisan and partisan reconciliation proposals that have come through to supercharge fuel production in America, and it's not working on the timelines that we need. So that is one thing that I want to leave this room with: fuel, fuel, fuel. At Oklo, in addition to needing HALEU fuel to power our fast reactor, we can recycle spent nuclear fuel. We can leverage all those transuranics. We think that's really important. We have a nuclear waste problem in America. It is decades and decades of a political fight. That waste is an asset. It can be turned into nuclear fuel for some of the advanced reactors that are being designed in America, not just Oklo's. We started that technology. We pioneered it. We allowed it to get offshored. France and Japan do it. China and Russia do it. And we need to restart it. That is a really, really important policy area that we are working on at Oklo, because fuel will be the greatest unlock for us to scale and grow. And I think as we go through this conference and you think about all of the important things that can happen and will happen, I loved Emily's comments earlier that great things came out of the executive order from President Trump. I mean, we were in the room in the Oval Office for that signing for a reason. It is bold, it is exciting, it is NRC reform, the DOE pathways, the national security pathways, the entire fuel EO, really exciting. It still needs a lot more work from Congress to supercharge and ensure that those monumental policies get enacted and help companies like us succeed over time. We're commercializing a 30-year technology that the Department of Energy ran, an advanced reactor in Idaho called the EBR-2. Our first reactor will be at the Idaho National Lab. So for anybody here that's following the Department of Energy, Secretary Wright launched an RFI asking for energy sources like nuclear and the artificial intelligence and data center world to respond. Would it be helpful for them to unlock Department of Energy land for data center and AI build-out co-located with nuclear energy? The answer to that is yes. We are going through that first process of building a reactor on US government soil. It has some challenges, including NEPA, multiple times. But we've gotten quite our way through that. We've learned a lot of lessons. I think others won't have those same pain points, and we're so close that it's gonna be real for us and real for so many others. So I think there's so much to happen beyond the Advance Act. I hope we can dive into policy specifics, but fuel, I guess.
That's great. Unexpected policy answer, but there's some parts of it, like you said, are already in there. Some of the money has been appropriated and not spent from the last administration. So I think a theme we will come back to is deploying, right? We have great legislation. We even have incentives. How are we going to deploy this? And I'd like to introduce our diversity candidate for the panel, Bryan. We didn't want just small and medium reactors. We wanted large ones, and we wanted Westinghouse at the table. A lot of the legislation from the reform is focused at advanced new reactors. Yeah. But I, among many other people, are a great fan of the AP1000 and the Westinghouse program. Maybe you can tell us your customer story and anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. So pleasure to be here and on quite such an esteemed panel here. I joined Westinghouse 3 years ago. I serve as an account executive responsible for the customer engagement with both Constellation and most recently have been added to my portfolio's engagement with the hyperscalers, right? So when everyone is talking about AI and build out and their interest in nuclear, I'm the sort of canary in the coal mine, if you will, in terms of going off and getting introduced to these folks and quite honestly kind of getting them up to speed about the commercial nuclear power industry, right? In my role, I'm very much involved like in all activities related to the relationship between our customers. It also means that I'm basically a mile wide and an inch deep, and it's been a long time since I've had to go into policy issues. But we'll do my best to kind of have this conversation here back in DC. So as we were talking about Westinghouse, right, we've got the AP1000 technology. That is what was built down in Georgia, right? And that is the gigawatt scale reactor size. We also have AP300 SMR technology that is under development, as well as our Avinci microreactor. So it's kind of representative of all different sizes, right? Different types of markets, various interests from customers, right? By way of background, I've been in the commercial nuclear power industry for 16 years, 13 of that within the AE role. 3 years was actually in government affairs. I was the director of federal and state government affairs for the French nuclear company Areva when we were last talking about a nuclear renaissance in the United States, and we were attempting to build reactors. So, and
History better not repeat itself.
well, and I definitely, well, and I do want to say that actually the most encouraging thing that I see, and the difference between the previous, nuclear renaissance, and for those people who were not necessarily in this realm at that point in time, to the nuclear industry folks, please don't say that what we're doing now is the nuclear renaissance. There's a lot of scars. There were a lot of companies that went bankrupt, including my own.
Spring, resurgence, exuberance?
Any of the above, we'll see, right? But what I think is the biggest change that in my experience is the conversation back in the early mid-2000s was really industry driven, right? It was the nuclear operators, right? And the nuclear operators are just a subset of the utilities, right? We always talk about them in much larger sort of context. They're like, oh, the utilities. I mean, honestly, the nuclear operators are just one piece within a much larger corporations, right? And they're not necessarily driving the strategy, but it was really the nuclear vendors and the nuclear operators that were really talking about the need for this. Now, like I take on this role about engagement with hyperscalers, and my introduction to what's been going on is New York Climate Week, and you've got Microsoft signing the deal with Constellation to restart 3 Mile Island, right? That's a massive game changer, right? You're talking about free enterprise system figuring out how to bring back a dead reactor. That's not...
Great symbolism, great excitement.
Yeah.
Renaissance almost? No.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so it's, it's very, it's a very exciting time, but I'd say we're much more measured than where we were last time around, right? And I will say that while, to me, what was true back then holds true today. It's really about the economics, right? And it comes down to being able to finance these projects that is really what sort of makes or break them, right? And how we go about determining what a final price tag is, right? Like that's largely what I'm spending my time on right now is how do you come up with a structure of a deal that includes so many different parties, right? So it's not just a technology provider, it's the owner-operator, it's the off-takers, it's the financial institutions, it's, federal and state government all cooperating together, basically saying kumbaya, right? And then that, in the end, spits out a final price tag, right? And what we're talking about creating is multi-generational assets. The United States fleet, originally as built in the 1970s, our concept of how long these reactors would be alive is 40 years. We're pushing them into 60, and now we're pushing them all to 80. And there's active conversations about pushing the existing fleet to 100. Now, personally, I would like to see some updates to maybe the old control rooms. But material-wise, everything else, we can continue to do it.
Paint them blue, maybe?
We do have blue reactors, yeah. So I mean, I'm encouraged by all of this. When we talk about what the customers are looking for, I would say that the confluence right now of very general, broad term hyperscalers, right, as well as large industrials. I don't think we should be mentioning them as well, right? You've got, like, Nucor has been out there, largest steel producer, United States, been talking about partnering up small modular reactors, but looking at, hey, we need grid, gigawatt grid scale energy, right, to support decarbonization of their whole production line, right? And they're talking about it and joining the Palmetto Nuclear Coalition to say, hey, how can we build new reactors in South Carolina, right? The importance of all of that is to say, yes, Advanced Act was huge, bipartisan, right? And it took time, right? And in many cases, some of these things take multiple Congresses to achieve, right? The tax credits that are in place, the investment tax credits, transfer tax credits, those types of things all help our pieces to the multidimensional puzzle that needs to be put together. And I would say also, and it's bipartisan. And then you throw in what the president did with the executive orders, with calling for having 10 new reactors under construction before the end of the administration, and then setting the vision of 300 gigawatts of new nuclear capacity in the United States. Honestly, we have not seen this level of support from the federal government, from the legislative branch and the executive branch at the same time, probably since Atoms for Peace. And that, it's historic, right? But we do need to continue these things. I know Julie's going to be talking later, so I have to say, Loan Program Office, that's going to help with the financial institutions be able to backstop financing for these projects.
So that's a good summary. Maybe you have a comment, but
Yeah, I was just going to have a brief comment. I would just say we have very different technologies here, but as a policymaker, you heard me say that Advance Act was the biggest nuclear reform we had in 40 years. Oklo's been around 10 years. Do you think it was written to support Oklo? No. These technologies are rapidly changing, and we need to make sure as policymakers that we're supporting all of them flourish, because at the end of the day, I need more from everyone. Right? There's not enough to go around, and our capacity is drastically increasing with the changes in technology. So more.
So maybe that's the billion-dollar question we'll transition to. There's such significant, policy headwinds that you've outlined, Bryan. There's the investment tax credit that still exists, the only carve-out. There's the Loan Program Office with previously $300 billion of loan authority. But we don't yet have nuclear construction, right? We have some kind of pre-construction. And is it enough? Is this enough, or what would move the needle over to actual orders and buying? And I think we'd get different answers. I want to reflect maybe some of the financial kind of buyer's perspective, but maybe... let's throw that back. Rita, is it enough? Is our policy framework enough? Do we need more out of legislators, or do we just need a project to get started?
So it's a great start. It's a really good start. The EOs have outlined, in my opinion, what is really needed, some aggressive deadlines for action. And the reforms that are coming out of the city are wonderful. But as somebody who has spent a lot of time in hands-on work, hands-on research, hands-on development, I am so ready for deployment. And that's why I'm at Radiant, because they are leading the way in terms of the timeline to deploy new nuclear in this country. Going to be one of the first to turn on a new reactor, a new advanced reactor in decades. Vogtle 3 and 4 were the most recent ones. But it's absolutely crucial to continue to have public-private partnerships. Just having all of this private investment alone won't do it. Clearly, we need the reform, the policy reform, and then just having government support won't do it either. There has to be a bit of incentive. And so if I could, I'm mindful of the clock, if I can jump to two topics that we had originally discussed. One is some cost overrun incentive or insurance in these new projects. Insurance is great if we can get that. But then if we want to reward the good behavior that we want, incentivize project completion, incentivize early project completion. I was talking earlier with a colleague, no penalty for early completion. How about we incentivize early completion? And it can be done. We're engaging the supply chain early. There is a diversity of suppliers that want to be in that supply chain. When you go out and you talk to suppliers, they want to be part of this industry. We need to engage them right now while we're all designing our technology so that we have their inputs and are able to manufacture the most advanced components and technology with the most advanced techniques.
Can I jump in for 30? I think I have a little bit of a different opinion, and I say it because we've had no problem raising private capital, and I don't see a problem raising private capital in the near future, and have over 13 gigawatts of an order book from hyperscalers. And I don't think we need more federal money in the system. I think, in fact, we have decades of the nuclear industry stagnating because it's really reliant on nuclear or on federal funding. There are a lot of really important tools we've talked about. The Loan Program Office was designed for nuclear. They're 30-year projects. Most definitely has been a catalytic tool. The investment tax credit and its transferability fuel the market and fuel investment, really important. Access to global markets for nuclear, we have cut ourselves off of global markets and deals, and I'm really hopeful we'll see a lot of new ones cut in this administration. I'm not as big of a fan of cost overrun insurance. I think we have a lot of cost overrun programs, and I think we can see more build at scale, but that's easier said than done. But I think we really, really need the smart investment tools that the federal government can bring to the table, and then the market to flourish in the current moment. I sit next to someone who has some of the biggest hyperscaler orders in our country. There's a lot of demand, there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of capital that exists, and we need the regulatory framework to stay clean and simple and be incentivized to succeed. The permitting conversation before us around the judicial OODA loop is a really good point where we could see some important reform. But I don't know that more money from the federal government or some of these other tools that are being asked for are really going to get us to build at the scale that the president has outlined.
This Republican policymaker says amen.
Yeah. I mean, that's a good point. Nobody wants to give more money exactly to the nuclear industry, right? Like the ask for, we could agree that we don't want to slip backwards, like the ITC that could really incentivize new building, and the LPO that Chris Wright has supported and could be so important for a new build. We definitely don't want to lose those, but the moral hazard of just having an unlimited cost overrun insurance, I think, is one of the reasons we don't actually see it. And so I guess I had the perspective that the existing subsidies, the ITCs and LPOs, if applied in the right way and maybe with some more equity partners, should be enough to incentivize profitable building without anything extra. But right when I was trying to, advocate for that in the industry, now if there's any whiff of those going away, you see like mega projects stalling. Like nobody's going to do anything if we don't know where we're at. So that's generally where potentially we are. But Bryan, do you have any feedback on cost overrun? The trickiest thing in the industry, most of the utility buyers will say, and even the regulatory commissions, I'd love to build. As long as you provide cost overrun, I'll do it. And I'd say the financial community is largely the same. They'll say, sure, okay, I go up to 20 billion, but what if it's over 27 billion? Okay, I'm not going to even get started. So that is roughly where the industry is, saying that there's not quite enough there. Can we be creative without asking for more appropriations?
Sure. I mean, that would be wonderful if we didn't have to go and ask for additional appropriations. I think where discussions are going with regards to the cost overrun insurance is, is there a reasonable sort of cap on cost overrun that you sort of establish to say, okay, the individual parties then are willing to accept and cap that risk, but then what do you do in the black swan event, right? Like Vogtle 3 and 4, there was definitely issues on all parties involved, right? But one of the major issues was COVID hit in the middle of construction, right? So just as we were getting to peak workforce, thousands of people pouring concrete, making, nuclear welds and pulling cables all over the place, right? It's an absolute all stop.
You didn't predict that?
No, right? And while it's, I believe, and honestly, I do have to say here, right, is that like, thank you to Southern Company, like showing the leadership, showing the courage to stay the course, right, and complete the project, right? Because it was really tough, right? And there was a lot of voices that were saying, walk away from this thing, shut it down, right? And Southern Company said, no, this is the right thing to do for the future of the people of Georgia. And they pushed it all the way through, right? And now they have they're producing, roughly 2,400 megawatts worth of electricity 24/7, and they're going to do that for the next 80 years, right? So, but yeah, to the point about the black swan stuff, and I would say too is that like from my perspective, just in general, not just not taking off my Westinghouse hat for a second, but like somebody who's been dreaming of having new reactors built in the United States for the last 16 years. Like the AP1000, right, wrong, or indifferent, it's licensed, it's been built in the United States. We have a robust and functioning supply chain. We know all of the quantities that are needed to actually construct this thing. And the best way that we can be prepared to build all of the reactor designs is making sure that we have a workforce in the United States of tens of thousands of individuals that know how to pour nuclear concrete, know how to make nuclear welds, pull electrical cables, and oh yeah, by the way, can pass an FBI background check and get drug tested on a regular basis. And let me tell you, that's in short supply.
Okay, so we only have 1 minute, and
I'm going to give some homework because we want to talk about what else is needed.
Right.
So for those of you that are policymakers, and I think there might be a couple of you in here, I think the legislative action that would help us on our Radiant timeline, I'm going to give you 5 things that I need help with. One is categorical exclusions for reactors that are below a certain power threshold for fuel mass, so 5 megawatts or smaller. The use of general licenses to cover multiple deployments of a specific reactor type so that we avoid redundant and very time-consuming license application reviews. The relaxation of public notification requirements in general, or more specifically for reactors that have fuel loaded in a factory. The 4th is modified requirements for transportation of fuel that's in a reactor, currently treated as shipping containers, to avoid unrealistic test conditions. And finally, it was already mentioned earlier in the panel, a permanent storage repository to eliminate the need for ongoing site storage.
is that all, Rita?
That's all. I told you it was
So-
short,
I'll
short
double tap a
list.
lot of that. That was pretty
So
good.
we are going to have to close the panel down and
Bring back Yucca.
But I
Or
guess
recycle it.
that would be the message to the audience. You have amazing experts here. Our purpose is not to serve our reactor companies, but the American people. And I think any legislators can get in touch with this whole panel and any way that we can help and have discussion. There is a win possible here for building nuclear that is extremely politically popular, and it's what the country needs. And so let's go do it.
It's nuclear's moment.
Yes, it is. Nuclear moment.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody.